This is George Galloway for Kalima Horra on Al-Mayadeen television, coming to you from London. Coming to you from London. I'm George Galloway, presenting Kalima Horra, where every word is free. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, coming to you for Al-Mayadeen television from London, where an audience of experts and some gifted amateurs like myself will consider the question of what's going to happen now in Britain that the first Conservative majority government since 1992 has been elected. A word of warning, a kind of health warning, first of all. If you imagine that the overwhelming majority of British people are supporters of the British Conservative Party, you'd be wrong. In fact, only 24% of the British people voted Conservative earlier this month in the British general election. How then can the Conservatives have a parliamentary majority over Labour of more than 100 seats and a majority over everyone else of 12 seats if they only got less than a quarter of the popular vote? Don't imagine the Conservatives are in as strong a position as it looks from the electoral map, which covers the country in blue, their political colour, but that hides many, many other realities. It was undoubtedly a big failure for the opposition Labour Party, and its leader, as was Mr. Ed Miliband, who declared for the first time ever in a British would-be Prime Minister that he was a Zionist. I don't know why he did that, not least because nobody was much impressed by it. Those that he might have thought would be impressed by it voted against him in overwhelming numbers. More than 75%, for example, of British Jews voted against Labour and for the Conservatives. The question is, what now are they going to do with it? Well, on the economic level, they have made no secret. They intend that the austerity which ordinary people in Britain have been suffering these last 5 years will deepen and grow ever more ice cold. In fact, more than 30,000 million new pounds will be cut out of public budgets, meaning real hardship for disabled people, for people that are out of work, for poor children, for those dependent on the state, for health, for education, for social care and other things. In a way, that's a given. The Conservatives openly exist for the strong, the rich and the powerful. So it will come as no surprise that if you're not strong, rich or powerful, you're going to have a pretty awful 5 years. But it's on the foreign policy level that viewers of this program will be more interested in studying. The British government, now a majority government, no Liberal Democrats in coalition, no one to hold them back, will be a hardline, neocon, neoliberal political force. And that will play itself out in the confrontation with Russia, in the putative confrontation with China, but most importantly for you, in the Middle East. This British government is a friend of all the tyrannies. In fact, it could not be a closer friend of Israel, and that's what David Cameron himself pledged, that there could be no closer friend of Israel than him. And he wasn't lying. It's really true. But he's equally, deeply in love with some of the Arab tyrannies in the Persian Gulf. So look out for an intensification of British support for the repression in Bahrain, for example, of British support for the fanatic, heart-eating, head-chopping idiots that have ripped Syria to pieces. Look out for more of the same from the British government, maybe even more, not just of the same, but a stepped up role for Britain in the aggression that is destroying Syria. But I have concluded that the British, the American, and the Israeli government are actually facilitating the march of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Middle East. I'm now persuaded of that, having resisted it all of these years. The evidence to me has become so overwhelming that one becomes a fool to look away from it. And if I'm right about that, that means more British involvement, interference in Syria and in Iraq, to the detriment of the possibility of peace, the possibility of stability in both countries. In Yemen, you can be sure the British government will intensify its support for the US-Saudi assault on the poor people of the Arab world's poorest country. In the Ukraine, on issues concerning Russia with sanctions and so on, the British government is going to play a very bad role. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra on Al-Madin television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, discussing Britain in the wake of a shock, surprising British election result that put David Cameron back into number 10 Downing Street, but this time with a majority. This time, no more Mr. Nice Guy. At least that's how it looks to me. Of course, it's your point of view that I now want to hear. Let's take the first contributor. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Sabri Malik. I am the official spokesperson of the Democratic Party in Libya. On behalf of the Libyan people, I would like to thank the British people and Her Majesty's government for helping us getting rid of the brutal dictator Gaddafi. Getting rid of Gaddafi was nothing short of a miracle. We'll always be grateful to Britain. I believe that the Conservative Party, which helped us in this respect, stands for freedom and human rights throughout the world. Unlike Labour Party, which supports dictatorships in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in Central Asia. For example, Mr. Tony Blair and Mr. Peter Mandelson used to be on the payroll of Gaddafi. They are still on the payroll of dictators in the Middle East and Central Asia. We need to make a very clear distinction between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. We believe that the Conservative Party will go on to help the Arab Spring and support the revolutions throughout the Middle East. Thank you.
I was waiting for you pulling off a mask and revealing yourself as a comedian. I really cannot believe that you just said the words that you said. But it is Kalima Horra, where every word is free. So other than the defamatory points that you made, I'm sure what you said will be in the broadcast, as will my reply. The idea that the Conservative Party supports the Arab Spring against dictatorships is so wrong, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. You obviously are blissfully unaware of the relationship between the Conservative Party and the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia, for example. You're obviously unaware that the people in Bahrain have been rising up year after year in an Arab Spring and have been ruthlessly crushed by, amongst others, that Saudi tyranny armed and trained by the Conservative Party government of David Cameron. And you obviously haven't been in Libya for a long time. You can't have been. Otherwise, you would not dream of coming on international television and discussing Libya as if it were some kind of success. Gaddafi was everything you said he was. And it takes real genius to make Libya worse than it was under Gaddafi. And that's what's been achieved by your friends in the Conservative Party and NATO and their allies, no doubt, in exile in London and elsewhere. Libya no longer exists. Libya is 5 Libyas, 10 Libyas, 20 Libyas, 100 Libyas, all massacring each other. The country is sailing in blood. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are jumping on boats to try and escape and drowning in the Mediterranean. Your country was bombed day and night by NATO. And now, Sirte, which was bombed by the Americans when Gaddafi was in, is a self-declared part of the ISIS caliphate. Some success story. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, one brigand group after another, taking control of the airport, of the parliament, chasing out the government. How many prime ministers have you got? How many foreign ministers? It's an absolute catastrophe, Libya. And you come here in your nice suit, safe here in London, and hail it all as some kind of triumph, and you have the gall to salute the Conservative Party. Well, if the Conservative Party do to Britain what they did to Libya, then God help us. God help us, because they destroyed your country, which no longer exists. And you, presumably on some kind of payroll, come here and take your hat off to it. Be gone. Who's next?
May I respond to that?
Yes,
please?
you can.
I am on the payroll of nobody, unlike you, who used to be on the payroll of Saddam.
No, I've never been on Saddam's payroll, and I don't believe you're not on a payroll. You look very prosperous. How do you earn your living? How do you earn your living?
Certainly not from Saddam or Gaddafi.
No, I never met Gaddafi, and I was never on a payroll of Saddam. And by the way, those who claimed that I was had to pay me millions of pounds in damages. So be very careful what you say.
Do sue me then.
You are on a payroll. How are you earning your living? Who's paying you?
The British Social Security.
Well, you're doing very well on British Social Security. That's truly remarkable. In fact, I think I'll call the police, because you must be a benefits cheat, because you can't possibly have the lifestyle you live on British Social Security.
What
But leave that aside.
what lifestyle is that?
Leave that aside. I don't know if you've just checked out for the afternoon from some kind of psychiatric unit, but if you are coming here on international television to claim that what's happened in Libya is a success, then you must be insane. If you're not on a payroll, you can only be saying this because you are unwell. Your country has ceased to exist, and you want to thank David Cameron for it?
The problems Libya is having is because of what Gaddafi did 42 years in the country, and because of people like you supporting dictatorships throughout the Middle East. It is only natural that we'll have a counter-revolution in Libya. Gaddafi's people are trying to come back, and the Libyan people, the 17th of February revolution, is fighting them back. What's happening in Libya now is the result of 42 years of Gaddafi's tyranny. It is not easy to go from dictatorship to democracy, but we will get there. And we are very thankful to America and to Britain, to NATO, for helping us doing that. Libya is not disintegrating. We are having problems with the counter-revolution.
Libya is not disintegrating? Are you serious? Are you the only person?
I am always serious.
Are you the only person in the world that cannot see Libya disintegrating in front of their eyes? Of course, the point you make about decades of dictatorship being followed by instability is, of course, true. I never met Gaddafi or any member of his family. I had no relations with the Gaddafi regime. I was glad that it was overthrown. But it takes genius, as I said, to get rid of Gaddafi and bring in something worse. And you have brought in something worse. And it's not a counter-revolution. It's a swirling mass of militia, murdering militia, declaring themselves to be the government, self-appointed nobodies, declaring themselves to be the prime minister, the foreign minister, the finance minister. It's a complete meltdown that's going on in Libya.
This is just the propaganda of the counter-revolution. You don't want to understand that it's only natural for Libya to go through these problems. We are doing much better than Egypt when the counter-revolution came back in full, or Tunisia, where the old regime is still there in place. To displace the old regime is very difficult. We managed to get rid of most of his security apparatus. We managed to get rid of most of his army, but there are still some of them there. We are continuing with the job, and with the help of our friends in the West, we will establish our democracy, whether you like it or not.
Well, I very much hope that Libya will establish democracy, but if it does, it will not be with the help of your friends in the West, because they don't believe in democracy. Certainly not for the Arabs. They love democracy in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure. They're going to ask the new King Salman to put himself before the public for a democratic vote. Even you are smiling at that prospect. It is an absurdity to say, as you have said, that you're going to establish democracy in Libya with the help of your friends in the West. David Cameron, the Conservatives, and NATO, and the United States. If you think these people are your friends, then you are a very seriously troubled man. You're very seriously troubled. And I'm going to stop pummeling you now.
My friend, communism is dead. So why are you still a communist? What do you do you speak like the Soviet, like the Soviets and the Mao Zedong regime?
I am not now, nor have I ever been, a communist. I have nothing to do with Mao Zedong. Neither had I anything to do with Gaddafi, and I was never on Saddam's payroll. So, leaving aside your childish and ignorant insults, the truth is that your country has been destroyed by William Hague, by David Cameron, and the Mediterranean is filled with the human consequences, which is what the rest of us are going to discuss now. As it happens, the next show is about Libya. You wandered into the wrong show, sir. But nonetheless, it's been fun having you. Who is next? Yes, gentleman in the yellow.
Thanks, George. My name's Ben Riddle. My question is surrounding the general election and the 5 years to come. It seems the Conservatives managed to pull off something ingenious for themselves.
Yes.
in that they got the majority when nobody really was predicting that. And
certainly not the opinion polls, which were unanimous that it was going to be a hung parliament.
Absolutely. I believe that they managed to do this by spinning the biggest lie, one of the biggest lies in British history, that Labour was responsible for the recession, and that they, the Tories, were responsible for the recovery, if you can call it recovery. Perhaps it's a ghost recovery, but okay, let's just go along with that. And I believe that ordinary working class and ordinary working middle class people, a lot of those, including my dad, who are not wealthy or got inherited wealth, and who have left of centre views, somehow bought into this lie and thought, well, we can't have the Labour Party coming because they'll wreck things again. So the Tories managed to pull it off, and I believe that's how they won the election. So my question, I suppose, is what hope is there for ordinary working and working middle class people in the next 5 years, and how can these people be convinced that the Tories are not the party for a healthy economy, but that a left-wing, ideally social, but a left-wing party would be?
Well, I think it's a double lie that you have alluded to, and it was successfully played. Dr. Goebbels, I think, popularized the idea that if you're going to tell a lie, make it a really big one and repeat it often. And some, perhaps enough, will believe you. The lie that Labour caused the economic crash in 2008 was so successful that Labour didn't even contest it. Labour accepted it, and in the now leadership election for the new leader of the Labour Party, they're arguing about how much they should have accepted that which is manifestly untrue. Of course, Blair and Brown left the banks with their light touch regulation to do almost whatever they pleased. That's true, and that was a contributory factor to the crash. But the Conservatives complained at the time that the regulation was not too light but too heavy. They were demanding more freedom for the banks to take us more quickly to the precipice over which we crashed in 2008. So the double lie was that Labour caused the crash, but the second part of that double lie is that there's been a recovery. There is no recovery. The growth figures in the last quarter are virtually non-existent. At the risk of being called a communist, which I'm not, the reason for the crash was the economic system, finance capital, that we have in this country, in the United States, and across most but not all of the world. So how are we going to get out of this? I don't know. Perhaps we shan't. If the European referendum takes Britain out of the European Union, I'll be leaving. I think you should too, because I think that a Britain out of the Union, and with Scotland having left, and everyone looking suspiciously at the Welsh to see if they're going next, will not be a country worth living in. So, we're discussing the British general election and the British government, but as you can see, the ramifications of what happened here in May, on May the 7th in 2015, are not by any means confined to this sceptred isle. I'll be right back after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing the outcome of the British general election 2015. Our cameras were out on the streets of London this very day to hear what the populace thought. Watch this.
Well, we voted for the Conservatives, maybe not everyone, but we certainly cast our vote to bring a Conservative government in. I think there'll be some winners and some losers, there always are. If benefits are capped, then people on benefits will be losers. And if industry thrives and interest rates go up, then business and other people in the economy will prosper as well.
I think they're for a very few people. I don't think they're for regular average people that just want to have a house and educate their children, etc.
Well, I think the Conservatives, I call them Tory at times too. I think they're fantastic. I think they've got it together.
Well, They've got a slim majority. It's just about workable, but I think they'll need the help of one or two smaller parties on major policy issues. He's going at it full pelt, so we should be pleased that we've got a youthful Prime Minister leading a minority government, really.
كاميرون وعد قبل ما ياخذ السلطة هون انه يزيد النواب اليهود بقلب مجلس العموم البريطاني. فهلا بعتقد صاروا 24 نائب.
Well, that was some of the reaction on the streets of London. More later to the re-election of David Cameron, this time though for the first time heading a majority Conservative government, for the first time actually since 1992, the long period of power of Mrs. Thatcher and her protege John Major, which came to an end in 1997 with the landslide victory of Tony Blair. Labour then won 2 further general elections, but lost in 2010 to a coalition government of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, now succeeded by David Cameron, all on his own. The consequences, in my view, for the British people will be condign, will be very severe, and the consequences for the world will be entirely malign. I believe that British governments of both colours have been playing a malignant role in international affairs since 1945, and it's about to get a lot worse. Let's see what the audience think. Let's take the gentleman at the back. Yes, please.
Hi, George. My name's Akib. My question is, as we feared, the new Tory government is introducing new laws and draconian laws against extremism, and especially against anything which is against British values, which is just an undefined concept and very vague at the moment. What exactly are these values? Because if you look at the last 100 years alone, the British values include colonialism. The British values included, not thinking anything of South African apartheid and actually calling Nelson Mandela a terrorist. They included heinous crimes like the Balfour Declaration and even starving to death millions of people in India and growing opium and selling it to Chinese people and getting them addicted to drugs, basically, just for profit. And these were all done in the name of British values. What the next 100 years going to hold for us in British values?
Well, that's a very good question and a very important part of this new government's programme. The British people, many of them, most of them, have values. Insofar as they are good values, they're not good because they're British. And there's nothing specifically British about them. I think British people value freedom of speech. I think they value democracy as opposed to dictatorship. I think they value civility and politeness and standing in a queue properly when you're waiting for a bus rather than everyone knocking each other out of the road, and many, many other values. But there's nothing British about those. They're just good values. And many British people also have some bad values. And they're not bad because they're British. They're bad because they are bad. People in Denmark or in Portugal or in any country that you can mention have good values, and some have bad values. To try and put a national flag around them and overlook, as you just indicated, all the bad things and say that if you don't live up to what we define as British values, you'll be out. You won't be allowed in, or if you're in, you'll be out, and you'll be relentlessly surveyed and subverted by the intelligence community and the police and so on, if we suspect that you are weak on this or that British value. Now, we don't have to listen to the views of radical people like me about that. The government have already announced it themselves. The Prime Minister himself, David Cameron, said on the Monday after the general election, so 1, 2, 3, 4 days after his election victory, speaking to a National Security Council, which I must confess I never knew existed, but which we now have, aping the United States of America. He said this, and I quote, it's worth quoting because I don't think any British Prime Minister can ever have said any such a thing in all of our history. He said, in the past, we have been content to allow people to live their own lives as long as they stayed within the law. But we're going to have to turn the page on that now. Staying within the law will not be sufficient to protect you from the law. I mean, Kafka couldn't have invented that. Orwell could not have invented such language. But that's what the Prime Minister said. So now, our Prime Minister has told us that just being within the law will not protect us from prosecution and from state suppression. And Mrs. May, Theresa May, the Interior Minister, Home Secretary we call her here, she went into greater detail. She said that there are a whole category of people in Britain that will have to submit their tweets and their Facebook postings to the police before they can be posted. She also said that Ofcom, which governs the British television market and radio for that matter, will be strengthened with pre-broadcasting restrictions. So that, for example, if I were to give an interview to LBC, LBC would have to clear it with Ofcom before they could broadcast it. This is a very serious restriction on democratic freedom in this country, and one which, if it passes, will profoundly change this country for good. I hope that the broadcasters will stand up to it, but I fear that they may not.
My name's Tamina. My question is, with the Tory government in power for the next 5 years, where do you see the situation in the Middle East headed, and what implications will this have on British Muslims?
Well, I think the situation in the Middle East is headed for disaster, even bigger disaster than the one we can see in front of us now. The forces of fanaticism and extremism are winning. They're winning in Libya, they're winning in Syria, they're winning in Iraq. And those advances that they are making are pregnant with horrific consequences for everybody. In particular, of course, the people in those countries. Libya has effectively ceased to exist as a country. It's now a warring mess of armed militias of varying degrees of murderousness. One group hanging black people from trees, lynching them because of some perceived closeness of black people in Libya to the former regime of Gaddafi. In Syria, they now have taken command of one of the world's greatest archaeological, architectural, historical sites, and I'm sure before this show goes out, they will have begun to destroy it brick by brick. Certainly they have already beheaded, tortured, mutilated hundreds of people in Palmyra in just the first few days of their control. They are back in control of Ramadi, the capital of Anbar province in Iraq, and are 60 kilometers from Baghdad. So the British, who played a very significant part in bringing about all of these three situations, was the British that bombed Libya to the state where these militias could now be vying for control of the country. It was the British and the French and the Americans and others who financed the fanatics on the principle that they hated Bashar al-Assad, and so anyone would do, any ally would do, my enemy's enemy is my friend, strengthened them to the point that they are now potentially unstoppable. I mean that and say it with a heavy heart. They may be unstoppable in Syria, for sure, and in Iraq, at least large parts of Iraq, most probably. And if Britain was one of the reasons why all these things have happened. You can be sure that the British government is not going to be any part of any solution to these. It's a very depressing prospect, but I'd be a liar if I pretended that I saw it any differently. And I'm not a liar. Who's next? Yes, young gentleman at the front.
Sorry to focus the picture back at home, but I wanted to focus now on the Labour movement in this country, who lost its, until now, very strong contingent of MPs in Scotland to the Nationalists, who are in disarray at the moment and who have a lineup of potential leaders who are nothing of the true essence of the Labour Party. So my question to you is this: where do we go as a Labour movement now? Do we appeal to these 24% of voters who gave their support to the Conservative Party, of savage cuts and bombardment of working people? Do we now return to our values? And where do we go from here?
That's what the Americans used to call the $64,000 question, when $64,000 was a lot of money. It is the big question. It's the big question because, as you say, this donkey derby of, first it was 5, there may not in the end be more than 1 or 2 candidates who make it to the starting line to be the new leader of the Labour Party, the new leader of the opposition. It's a parade of 7 dwarves and now I think 4 dwarves still standing, and none of them is deserving of the appellation leader. And all of them, to one extent or another, have decided that the task in the next 5 years is to try to convert some of the 24% of the population that voted Conservative, which, if you think about it, shows a very basic lack of grasp of mathematics, apart from everything else. Because 5 million people who voted Labour in 1997 did not vote for them in 2015. And most of them didn't vote at all. Bear in mind that 35% of the people, more than a third of the people, didn't vote at all, despite an election campaign that was the longest in living memory, perhaps because, in part, of that. It seems to me obvious that you need to analyse why you lost these millions of Labour voters. What were the reasons why you lost them? And try to put those reasons right. Certainly, in Scotland, where Labour lost its absolutely hegemonic position and is now in the humiliating position that they don't have enough members of Parliament to ride a tandem. They have more pandas in Edinburgh Zoo than they have Labour MPs in Scotland. They have precisely 1. So, how are you going to get these hundreds of thousands of Scottish Labour voters back? Not by being more Tory, because the reason they left you was because they thought you were already too Tory. Not by being more Tony Blairite, because the reason they left you is you were too Tony Blairite. Ditto the 1 million people who voted for the Greens, 1.1 million. These people did not vote Green because they thought the Labour Party was too left-wing. They voted Green because they thought the Labour Party wasn't left-wing enough. And even the 4 million people who voted for the anti-European UKIP party, many of them, perhaps most of them, on economic questions, though not on questions of immigration and race, but on economic questions, would be classified as old Labour, supporting many of the things that old Labour, before Blair Labour, supported. For example, public ownership of public utilities, railways, and so on. More of this later. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London and discussing the implications of the Conservative victory in the general election on the 7th of May 2015. Will it be more of the same? Will it be better? Will it be worse? Well, in terms of foreign policy, definitely it's not going to get better, even though William Hague, the British Foreign Minister, has retired to the luxury and deep carpets of the House of Lords. I have no doubt by the time this programme goes out, the foreign policy is likely to be hard right, neocon, and as close to Washington as it's possible politely to describe it. Now, we took the camera out on the streets of London. We asked the people what they thought would be the consequences for British foreign policy of the Conservative victory. Watch this.
The Conservatives and the United States of America are brothers.
أنا أظن أن كل حزب يأتي للحكومة في بريطانيا لا تغير سياستها نحو أمريكا.
Yes, there's a personal sort of link with our Prime Minister and the President of the United States, so I think that will remain strong.
بعدين بالنسبة للسياسة الخارجية، بالنسبة للشرق الأوسط، بما أنه أنا من لبنان يعني ما بعتقد أنه حيصير في تغير.
بالنسبة للفرق بيننا وبينهم هم عندهم استراتيجية. حتى لو كان الأحزاب تغيرت عندهم استراتيجيات بيمشوا فيها. كلهم عندهم أهداف ومصالحهم. فلذلك متى ما رأوا إنه مصالحهم تتحقق زي ما قالت مارغريت تاتشر أيام ريغان، لم يجدوا ضحية ندعو لها جريمة إلا إنه معمر الغزافي بمحاذة للطيارة اللي سقطت في اسكتلندا. حتى لو كان هناك تغير في الأحزاب في الحكم، أتوقع أن هناك تغير في السياسة الداخلية والخارجية لدولة بريطانيا.
Well, that was the voice of the populace on the streets, but I've got some real experts here in the audience this evening, and let's hear from them on what they think. Yes, sir, in the middle.
يعطيك العافية أستاذ جورج، اسمي حسين، طالب كويتي. كعربي لا أملك معلومات كافية عن الاتحاد الأوروبي وفوائد وإيجابيات الاستمرارية والعضوية في الاتحاد الأوروبي، وأنا متأكد بأن أغلب المشاهدين العرب خلف الشاشة في نفس الحال. فإذا أمكن أن تعطينا يعني خلفية موجزة عن فوائد استمرارية بريطانيا في الاتحاد الأوروبي، ولماذا الحزب المحافظ يريد الاستقلال عنه والانفصال عنه.
Well, I only wish that the Arabs had a European Union. If there was an Arab Union like the European Union, we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in now. I can say that because the only reason we have a European Union is because of the mess that we were in. In the lifetime of people still alive today, 100 million Europeans lay dead, 94 million to be precise. The fires were burning in virtually every country in Europe. Nazism, fascism had massacred millions on an industrial scale. All Untermensch, all subhumans, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, disabled people, communists, socialists, Christian clerics, anyone who did not meet the criterion of Hitlerite master race, and especially the Jews, who suffered most, were wiped out, systematically eliminated. That was the Europe in 1945. I was born just 9 years after the end of the Second World War and when the European Union was just getting going. Since the formation of the European Union, with all of its faults, and it has very many, the idea of Europe being involved in a war against itself, between itself, is completely fanciful. This, a continent that in 1870, in 1914, and again in 1939, had been involved in a gigantic, cataclysmic series of continental wars. So the European Union has saved Europe from war, from ethnic cleansing, from the annihilation of each new whipping boy, each new scapegoat that would come forward periodically in European history. So it would be right to be in the European Union if that was the only reason. But of course it is not. The European Union is a market of 350 million people, most of them with quite significant spending power. The states of the European Union include extremely wealthy states, like Britain, like France, but above all like Germany, which is of course the economic powerhouse of the European Union. On a cultural level, London, Paris, Madrid, Rome, Berlin, these are great, truly great historical and cultural centers of civilization. In my opinion, and I have traveled the world many times, Europe is the best place in the world to live. For all its faults, it's the best place to live in terms of social peace, relative lack of crime, the relative amount of freedom of expression, and so on. Europe is the best place, better than all the others. So, go on.
We have an Arab Union, but its function is the opposite, creating wars. So.
That's very well put. You have an Arab Union whose purpose is to keep the Arabs disunited. But that's another subject for another evening. I think that the Conservatives, in part, feel the need to give expression to British nationalism. There are many British people, millions of them. It's quite worrying, as we were discussing before the break. It's all very well promising a referendum, but when the referendum comes, you're no longer in control of events. You cannot possibly control the outcome. It's by no means certain that Britain will vote to stay in the European Union, because there are many millions of British people who just don't like foreigners. And they don't just mean foreigners like you. They don't even mean foreigners like Muslims. There are many millions of British people who hate Polish people, Czech people, Slovak people, who are white and Christian, oftentimes far more Christian than they themselves are. They're white. So if race was the issue, you'd think they'd be really happy at all these Polish and other Eastern European people coming here, but they are not. They don't like foreigners. And UKIP, as a party, stands on the white cliffs of Dover, waving their British flags and shouting boo at Johnny Foreigner. And now they have a referendum. It's the greatest gift that anyone could have given them. And all the forces of British nationalism will be out there pushing for a vote to withdraw Britain. I still believe that the majority will decide to stay, but I'm not certain about that. I wouldn't stake anything on that. The outcome is too uncertain, unpredictable for that. The Conservatives don't really want to leave the European Union, but they had to promise this referendum to try and hold off the attack from their right, from UKIP and other right-wing Europhobic conservative members of Parliament. Such people are the last embers of empire. They think that the world is a white man's burden and John Bull was given a special place in destiny to carry it. They think that we can resurrect a British empire of sorts again. They think, actually, and in some cases they are right, that there are people in Libya, in India, in former parts of the empire who really would like the British to come back. And by the way, I've met such people. And I don't just mean tonight. I've met them in India, I've met them in Pakistan, I've met them in Africa. People who quite like the idea of a father somewhere who's making their decisions for them. Of course, the anti-colonial struggle drove the British and other empires out of their territories, thank God. But there are many British people who have never reconciled to that. There are other British people who want us to be the 51st state of the United States of America. And the question is, how many British people will acknowledge and vote for the fact that we are a European people, that Europe is 20 miles away, 27 miles away from our territory, and that our future lies in Europe and not as the 51st state, and certainly not in glorious imperial isolation. Who's next? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Rahim. You mentioned earlier at the beginning of your talk that you have come to the conclusion that the West, USA, UK, has been supporting ISIS, having sort of thought about it in quite depth. So I would like to know what is your sources, the evidence that you see, that you gathered to come to such a conclusion.
Well, my principal source is my own two eyes. I have been watching the march of the most horrific military political force I have ever seen in my lifetime, capturing town after town, city after city, perhaps soon country after country. And I know that if the Western powers did not want that to happen, they could stop it. Instead, they have embarked on a kind of charade in which they claim an air campaign. Let's analyze it. It's an air campaign 1/10 of the size of that which they mounted against Yugoslavia in 1998. Never mind the Iraq War, where they dropped more bombs than were dropped in the entirety of the Second World War. Never mind that. They dropped 10 times more ordnance on Yugoslavia than they have on ISIS. That's not serious. That's showmanship. It's desultory excuse that they have put up in front of the British and American and other public opinion. Secondly, the absolute equanimity with which Israel is watching events is a very telling story. It's the dog which didn't bark. If it was really the case that some mortal threat to every value we hold dear was closing in on Damascus and power in the country next door to Israel, don't you think they'd be jumping up and down about it just a little bit more? Don't you think Israel would be calling meetings of the Security Council and Netanyahu would be holding up his diagrams showing how close ISIS were to Jerusalem? Anybody see any sign of that? Anybody hear any complaint from Israel about the astounding level of military success of ISIS / Al-Qaeda in their next door neighbor? This must be telling. It must be. They must be hoping for an ISIS victory. And if they are, it seems to me axiomatic that if they are, we cannot be ISIS's enemy. That must always have been a game. I've been in politics a long time. I was the one who told Mrs. Thatcher on the eve of the fall of Kabul in Parliament in 1988, I told her, you have opened the gates for the barbarians, and a long dark night will now descend upon the people of Afghanistan. And I never said a truer word. And she did that. She opened the gates for the barbarians that became Al-Qaeda, that became ISIS, on the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. I pointed out, sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy, which is manifestly the case in Syria. There are many, many things wrong with the regime of Bashar al-Assad, but they're not going around the world eating people's hearts, cutting off their heads, destroying churches, destroying religious communities of all kinds. But ISIS are. So how can they be your friend? They're worse than your enemy. But that's not what's happening. Western policy is still absolutely bent upon the destruction of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Now, that can't be because it's a one-family rule, because, hey, the Al Saud family are big friends of ours. Can't be because it's a dictatorship, because, hey, all of our friends from Cairo to Riyadh are dictatorships. Can't be about human rights, can't be about freedom, can't be about democracy, must be about something else. And we'll discuss in the next segment what that something else might be. So, directly and indirectly, I'm charging the British government and others with facilitating the advances of ISIS in the Middle East. It's a serious charge. I'm ready to defend it, here, now, everywhere. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming from London, discussing events in Britain, but not just as they affect the British, but as those events and the new power in London will affect the world. Let's hear more from the audience in what is now, I'm afraid, the last segment. Yes, sir.
شكرا جزيلا سيد جورج. أنا أبان الحكيم من العراق. أود أن أسألك حول رؤيتك عن الشرق الأوسط. كيف ستتأثر منطقة الشرق الأوسط عامة وخاصة بلدي العراق إثر مجيء المحافظين في الحكومة البريطانية وفيما يتعلق في الحرب على داعش؟
Well, the British policy, which is already as close as possible to the policy of the United States, that is to say different from the policy of the European mainland. Whenever there is a choice to be made, British governments choose Washington rather than Europe. Oftentimes there is no choice to be made at all. They're indistinguishable, but when there are choices, the British government will almost always follow the United States. That will become more extreme. You might argue it couldn't be less extreme. But I think as the presidency of Barack Obama dwindles to an end, it's almost certain that he will be replaced by someone much worse than him. Much more hawkish, much more neoconservative, much more neoliberal in economic terms and neoconservative in foreign policy terms. And the British will love that. The Cameron government and either Mrs. Clinton or whomsoever, God forbid it's another Bush, is in power in the White House, they'll be as close as it's possible to be. And that means blanket support for Israel and all its crimes, blanket support for the Arab dictatorships in keeping them in power against their people, suppressing their rights, and if my thesis is correct, continued support for the disintegration of the Arab world, this Sykes-Picot to this sectarianization of the Arab polity, where we'll have not just 23 countries, we'll have hundreds of emirates. Best of all, if they can be divided on sectarian grounds, then they can all be at war with each other for another 100 years, and the British businesses and so on will be quids in, as we say. So not a good prospect, I'm sorry to say. Let's take the gentleman at the back.
سيد جورج إذا تسمح. العراقيون حاليا يعولون على الحشد الشعبي، وهو الأمل الوحيد لدى العراقيين في محاربة داعش بشكل جدي وتحت قيادة المرجعية. هل المحافظين سيؤثرون على هذا الحشد الشعبي بصورة إيجابية أو سلبية برأيك؟
Well, it depends on the exact state of play in relations between the West and the Islamic Republic of Iran. But I'm guessing that those relations are as good today as they're ever going to be, and they're probably going to be worse in the next presidency that's coming along quite soon in the United States. Of course, the militia of which you speak are the only serious military competitors for ISIS. It's abundantly clear that the Iraqi army is a very expensive, bad joke. They have once again in Ramadi run away from a force a mere fraction of their size, leaving all their expensive weapons and equipment behind them. They have no fight in them. Only these militia can fight ISIS. The problem is, the more ISIS are fought by these militia, the more sectarianized Iraqi politics will become, and the more impossible it will be to reconstitute a single Iraqi national state. That's why I have to say, I'm sorry, I know you're Iraqi, and believe me, I'm not saying it because I want it to be true. It's the last thing in the world I want to be true. I don't believe that Iraq will survive as a state. Iraq will become 3 Iraqs, and very soon. Because the only way to defeat these fanatics is for the Shiite militia backed by Iran to fight them. They're the only people who can defeat them. But in so doing, they effectively partition the country, because the Sunni mass in the west of Iraq will not live under Shiite militias from Baghdad and the south. We'll have to have a proper program on this at more length. Let me take the gentleman at the back, please.
Hi, George. My name is Hussein Ali. I'm president of the Middlesex University Global South Solidarity Society. Thank you. I was just wondering, we were talking earlier about Euroscepticism and how it was pushed by the big businesses or big powers were pushing this sort of message. Do you think this has anything to do with the rise of Syriza and Podemos in Spain, and whether it's even better for Europe to get rid of our Tory government completely out of...
Well, on the last point I agree. I think that the Europeans would be better off without the constant drag of Europhobic Britain. Neither in nor out at the table, but sitting at the table with their leg out trying to trip up everyone else as they go by. I could well see why the other Europeans would be quite happy to be shot of their British problem. I don't actually think that British business wants Britain to leave the European Union. Small business might, medium-sized businesses slightly, to a lesser extent, maybe, but big business wants to remain in the European Union because there are very grave economic and trading consequences and currency consequences of British withdrawal from the European Union, and I don't think that big business wants to face those. But many right-wing politicians do. In any case, Syriza hasn't turned out to be quite the fireworks display that we expected. Podemos haven't continued their advance. In fact, they are now subsumed in a broader coalition, as you know, the indignados, the indignant ones, and they're doing quite well, but not well enough to take state power. So I don't believe that the challenge, even on the European mainland, from the left, is the reason why British people in large numbers, hopefully not decisive numbers, would like to get out of the European Union. I think it's much more base than that. They just don't like foreigners. And that comes from our imperial past as the great white chiefs. Who else would like to speak? Yes, and then you, madam.
Hi, George. I agree with you about the European question, that once it's going to go to a referendum, there's really nothing you can say or do to affect that. Whatever the public decides is going to be a very big risk for the government. Cameron is pushing this sort of story of, you know, I'm going to get these concessions from Europe, but as you just said, the Europeans, the big European countries, they're pretty much sick of Britain always, you know, throwing a spanner in the works. They might just say, this is what we're going to offer you. You either come into Europe fully, or you leave Europe fully. When we're not, you know, entertaining any concessions or anything for you, so forget about concessions. If that happens, you know, we might end up leaving Europe, and that's a real possibility because Cameron's already said that he wants to vote yes. He's publicly said that I want to vote yes, but I want to get some concessions as well.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult thing for him to do, and I don't think he'll be able to achieve it.
It's the point I always make about these Frankenstein monsters. They grow quickly out of your control, and this process has now grown out of his control. For example, even if he squared it with the big, powerful European leaders, Merkel and Hollande, if you could call him big and powerful. France is at least big and powerful, if not its president. You have to have unanimity. So the Polish president, for example, has already made clear, I forget the president or the prime minister, made clear in the last few hours that there will be no concessions from us on the issue of freedom of movement, because that's really what Cameron wants. He wants the European Union to say to him that he can keep European workers out of Britain to staunch the flow of immigration into Britain. Now, why would any Polish leader agree to that? By doing so, he'd be making himself very unpopular in Poland. And the same goes for Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary and so on. So actually, even the big political leaders, if they could be squared to throw a bone to David Cameron, are not going to be enough, because any concessions will have to be agreed by all of the 28 members of the European Union. And that's not going to happen. Any concession that would be agreed by 28 would be a very small concession indeed. They might agree to redesign the note paper. They might agree to a little change to the flag or something, but they're not going to agree to anything which is detrimental to their own national interests. And many of them resent, as you say, the very dog-in-the-manger approach of Britain to the European Union in the first place. Yes, madam.
مرحبا جورج، اسمي أنا من لبنان. ألا تعتقد أن بريطانيا تستعمل ازدواجية المعايير حيث تقبل نتائج الانتخابات هنا في بريطانيا ولا أحد يعترض عليها رغم أنها لا تأخذ النسبية الصحيحة، بينما أعطت الضوء الأخضر لاعتقال أمين عام الوفاق في البحرين وآخرين من قادة المعارضة لأنهم طالبوا بديمقراطية وطلبوا أيضا بملكية ديمقراطية وليس لإلغاء العائلة الحاكمة.
Well, a Malakia Demokratia is a complete contradiction, of course, especially in the Arab Middle East, where the only monarchs who tell us that they are constitutional monarchs are monarchs first and constitutional very much second. They have the power and they're not going to give it up. And the Al Khalifa in Bahrain have no intention whatsoever of giving up power, whether constitutionally or otherwise. The demand of the people of Bahrain for one man, one woman, one vote to elect a leadership seems to me one that the British would ordinarily claim that they would support, but of course they don't support it in Bahrain. We're about to reopen a naval base in Bahrain for the first time since 1967, since Britain withdrew, as we used to put it, east of Suez. We're now going back east of Suez to make a new military base in Bahrain. And the reason for that is to show military support for the dictatorship in Bahrain. So double standards, I don't see it as double standards. I think this is their standards. They are liars, cheats, deceivers, robbers, thieves, murderers. Why should you expect anything different from them? Especially if you come from the empire. Because your fathers and mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers must have told you that God would never trust the British in the dark. That's why he had an empire for the British on which the sun never set, because you couldn't trust the British in the dark. They would do enough in the daylight, never mind the dark. They stole everything they could carry from you, from your country. In the case of Africa, even the people themselves as slaves. So, double standards, I think, more fool you with respect if you expect anything different from them. They are, as I've said, everything that's bad. You know, there's an old story, Aesop, the Roman slave, told the story about the scorpion and the dog. The scorpion stops at a raging river and he asks the dog, "Can I climb on your back and swim across the river?" And the dog says, "But you'll sting me." And the scorpion says, "No, of course not. I want to get across the river, please." So the dog allows the scorpion on his back, and halfway across the river he feels the deadly sting, and dying, he looks at the scorpion and he says, "Why did you do that?" And the scorpion answers, "Because I'm a scorpion." It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. It's been George Galloway, Kalima Horra, Al Television from London. Thank you very much.